My name is Commander Rachel Avery, and I'm 29 years old. I've served in the U.S. Navy for just under a decade. Cyber operations, systems warfare, classified threat mitigation. You won't find my name on public citations or newspaper headlines, but you'll find my work on battle outcome reports buried 6 levels deep in clearance protocol. Still, none of that mattered last night. Not here. Not at the Joint Naval Honor Reception, an annual show of suits, brass, and legacy. A place where you're not measured by what you've protected, but by who remembers your father's rank and who laughs at your uniform. I arrived alone. The event was held in San Diego inside a cavernous hall lined with portraits of dead heroes and speeches pre-approved by protocol officers. There were chandeliers, live music, junior officers sipping too much scotch, and cadets in uniforms that looked freshly ironed by their mothers. I kept my jacket buttoned high and my voice low. I wasn't there to network. I was there because Admiral Greer asked me to be. That was the only reason I said yes. The room was a constellation of medals and egos. Some people nodded politely when they saw the insignia on my collar. A few offered lukewarm greetings, but most especially the younger crowd gave me that look, the one that says, "You don't belong here." Not really. It was when I found my assigned table tucked near the back between an unused podium and the hallway to the kitchen that I heard it. A voice, young, arrogant, just loud enough to cut across the polished chatter like a blade through silk, must have wandered in from the IT desk. Who let the computer chick wear a uniform? There was laughter, not cruel exactly, more dismissive, careless, like I wasn't a person, just background noise. I didn't turn around. I didn't flinch. I simply adjusted the edge of my coat sleeve, placed my napkin in my lap, and waited for the insult to pass like I always did. But inside, I was 13 years old again, back in my garage in Jacksonville, Florida, covered in grease fixing my dad's old truck engine after school. He had already passed by then, and my mother worked doubles to keep the lights on. I had no brothers, no one to teach me the ropes. Just me, a socket wrench, and memories of my father telling me never speak first. Let your work speak for you. That cadet, he didn't know who I was. Didn't know that I'd led a Black Ops simulation just 6 months earlier that prevented a cyber attack on an entire fleet, one that would have left 3,000 sailors blind in hostile waters. He just saw a woman in a quiet uniform, alone, and assumed irrelevance. And why wouldn't he? To him, I didn't fit the image. I wasn't loud. I wasn't laughing. I wasn't flirting. I wasn't seeking validation. I was everything he feared, proof that quiet competence could outrank charisma. At that moment, I was prepared to let it slide. Just another bruise on a long, invisible history. And then it happened. A sudden hush rolled through the room, not silence exactly, but something even sharper, anticipation. Someone important had entered. I glanced up to see Admiral Charles Greer, a towering figure in dress blues, his silver stars catching the light like armor. Conversations faltered, glasses paused mid-air. The crowd parted the way it always does when someone who matters walks in. Except this time, he didn't walk toward the podium. He walked straight toward me. 1 step, then 2. Deliberate, eyes locked. I didn't move. Not because I was frozen, but because I already knew what was coming. Admiral Greer reached my table. He didn't hesitate. He stood at attention. And with every officer and cadet watching with that young cadet's face paling behind him, Admiral Greer raised his hand to his brow and saluted me. "Commander Avery," he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "thank you for your service." "It's an honor." You could hear a pin drop. That cadet! He looked like someone had hit him with a silent torpedo. His smirk evaporated. The laughter around him faded. No one dared to speak. I stood slowly, returned the salute with precision. "Thank you, Admiral," I said. He nodded, then looked around the room, almost daring anyone to question it. And just like that, the pecking order shifted. I could feel the recalibration people leaning over to whisper, "Who is she?" Others scanning my collar for rank. One officer nearby actually stood out of reflex. Respect. Or maybe fear. That cadet still hadn't spoken. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any apology. After Admiral Greer moved on, I sat down, adjusted my napkin again, and let the moment settle. Not for them, For me, because I'd waited nearly a decade to be seen, not by the people who mock easily, but by the ones who understand that leadership isn't volume, it's presence. It's what remains when the noise fades. And now I'm ready to tell the rest, because that night wasn't an isolated moment. It was the echo of 100 others' insults, swallowed victories, unseen rooms endured. It was the culmination of everything I've carried and everything I've chosen not to say. Until now. I didn't grow up in a world where people wore ribbons on their chest or barked commands on ships. Not at first, anyway. I was born in Jacksonville, Florida, in a faded blue house just a few miles from the naval station. My dad, Master Chief Avery, served 22 years in the Navy, mostly under the hulls of destroyers, always in the engine rooms where sweat and steel were inseparable. He died when I was 13. Heart failure, they said. Quick. Brutal. I didn't understand most of it at the time, just that the world got quieter when he was gone. Mom worked 2 jobs after that. Clerk at a pharmacy during the day, cleaning offices at night. She never complained. She just tied her hair up and got on with it. That became my first model for strength, not force, not anger, just quiet endurance, the kind that doesn't ask for recognition. I kept his dog tags, still have them in my locker today. It was Dad who first taught me how to fix things, engines mostly. He let me help him change oil and rotate tires before I even turned 10. He'd say, "You want respect, earn it with your hands first." And I did. In our garage, elbow deep in grease, I learned more about systems thinking and failure diagnostics than any textbook would ever teach me. After he passed, I stopped talking as much, stopped raising my hand in class. I wasn't the girl with the big ideas or loud opinions. I became the girl who sat in the back and submitted perfect work every time. I didn't need to be noticed. I just needed to build something worth noticing. By 17, I had a scholarship to a local community college. Cybersecurity wasn't glamorous back then, but it called to me logic, architecture, anticipation. I took every class I could find, graduated with a 4.0. Then quietly, I applied to the Naval Academy in Annapolis. It wasn't on anyone's radar. I didn't tell my classmates, barely told my mom. The day the acceptance letter came, she cried. I didn't. I was already planning. Annapolis was not built for people like me. Not just because I was a woman in tech, though that didn't help, but because I didn't perform the expected rituals. I didn't flirt with instructors. I didn't complain. I didn't try to dominate every conversation or insert myself into leadership. I kept my head down and outscored half the class in simulations. That didn't win me many friends, but it earned me the attention of Chief Petty Officer Darnell, one of the Academy's most respected technical warfare advisors. He was the kind of man who said little but saw everything. The first time we met, he handed me a circuit board and said, "You don't need noise to be noticed, Cadet Avery. Let your work echo louder than your rank." I never forgot that. Darnell became my informal mentor. He saw my strengths before I even knew how to name them. When others laughed during cybersecurity drills or called my team the keyboard kids, he saw the battlefield we were fighting, the ones with no bullets, only code. He introduced me to real field simulations, brought me into Black Ops scenarios reserved for the top percentile, even pulled strings to get me a 6-month internship at the Pentagon after graduation. That internship turned into an assignment. That assignment turned into a permanent role. No one clapped, no one cheered, and that was fine by me. While others my age were training in tactical maneuvering or learning to fly jets, I was behind sealed doors developing counter-intrusion programs and early warning network defenses. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't flashy. But it worked. By 27, I'd written an algorithm that identified and neutralized a fleet-wide vulnerability in the Atlantic Division's comm systems. I saved them millions in potential risk. The report was circulated internally. My name was mentioned once buried in the technical appendix. I didn't care. Because I had always known if I waited for applause, I'd go hungry. But if I kept building eventually, the people who mattered would take notice. That brings me to Admiral Greer. He was one of the few senior officials who ever looked past my rank and saw the architecture of what I was doing. We first met during a post-operation briefing for a simulated breach event. While others around the table debated field response times, I quietly pointed out that the breach originated from outdated firmware, a vulnerability I'd flagged 3 weeks earlier. After the meeting, he approached me and said, "Avery, you don't waste words. That's rare. That's leadership." He never forgot me after that. A few months later, I was invited to a closed briefing on future fleet security protocols, one of only 2 junior officers in attendance. That moment changed everything. My clearance deepened, my projects widened, and slowly people who never looked twice at me began paying attention. Still outside those halls at public events, at banquets like the one in San Diego, I was just another woman in khakis. Just another tech officer mistaken for support staff. Until last night. Until the salute. Until the laughter stopped and the room turned quiet, and the young cadet with the arrogant grin realized too late who he had tried to mock. It wasn't the salute that changed everything. It was the fact that I no longer needed it to feel whole. But it didn't start that way. Because there was a time not long ago when that same kind of insult nearly pushed me to the edge, when the rejection wasn't just casual, it was targeted, and it nearly broke me. It happened in the middle of a high-priority simulation, a cybersecurity war game hosted by Naval Systems Command. The kind they don't talk about in press releases. The kind where the stakes are classified but the consequences ripple into real operations. I was 27, just entering my second year as a systems warfare specialist assigned to a hybrid command between DC and Norfolk. My reputation had started to grow, not in public circles, but in quiet ways. Quiet was fine. That was how I'd survived. But this time I wanted something more. The Navy had just launched a new initiative, Project Horizon, a forward-looking operation to overhaul digital readiness in frontline fleets. The brass wanted innovation, agility, cyber defense officers who could anticipate threats before they emerged. I'd submitted a detailed blueprint outlining a multi-layered firewall system integrated with real-time adaptive learning. It was ambitious, experimental. It was also the best thing I'd ever built. I worked nights on it, weekends, turned down a transfer to remain on the project team. My supervisor, Lieutenant Commander Rollins, called it sharp work, but reminded me not to make too much noise about it. "You're still young," he said. "Let the senior officers present it. That's how it works." I nodded, but it hurt more than I let on. I had written every line of code, debugged every protocol, ran every test scenario. But when it came time to present our findings at the pre-deployment briefing, I was told to sit in the tech bay and stand by. They sent Lieutenant Blake Connors instead. Blake was smooth-talking, photogenic Navy ROTC turned golden boy. Came from a family of admirals, knew how to command a room. The kind of guy who called me RA, like we were college pals, even though we'd barely spoken outside of group meetings. He didn't understand half the architecture I built, but he wore it like a second skin when he stood in front of the command board and explained his team's innovation. My innovation. I watched from a monitor 3 floors below as he presented my system like he was unveiling a sports car. He even threw in a joke about how the nerds in the basement pulled it off. There was laughter, polite applause, then approval. Project Horizon was greenlit for active testing. And I was nowhere in the credit chain. No name. No mention. Just silence. Later that evening, Rollins patted me on the shoulder and said, "That's how the Navy works sometimes. Let it roll off. You'll get your turn." My turn. My turn. I went home and stared at my whiteboard, still covered in notes, sketches, algorithms, all the evidence that what they were celebrating had come from my mind. I sat there in my apartment, still in uniform, heart clenched. This wasn't about ego. It wasn't even about recognition. It was about the way they erased me, not out of malice, but out of habit, like I was a ghost, a utility, a line in a code base no one reads but everyone uses. A week later, while the approved systems were being integrated, the simulation went live. The scenario involved a simulated hostile breach of a carrier group's encrypted comms. My model was designed to isolate, counter, and reestablish clean lines within 180 seconds. The test version they ran, Blake's version, had been modified. He'd cut pieces out for efficiency, simplified protocols, compressed the decision tree. It failed. The simulated breach escalated. The scenario showed total communications blackout in 5 minutes. Entire strike groups lost coordination. Casualty projections in the sim over 1-200. And still no one called my name. No one said, wait, this wasn't her design. Instead, the blame was shared. The lesson was learned. The whole incident was logged, categorized, and moved along. And I was pulled aside by Blake in the hallway 2 days later. He smiled like we were in on a joke. Tough break, huh? But hey, at least we're learning right. Still, it got attention. Might be a promotion in this for us. Us. I stared at him for a long time, then simply said, "You compromised a failsafe because you didn't understand it, and people could have died." His smile faltered, but only briefly, because in his world there were never real consequences. And in mine, consequences were the only currency I had. I tried to escalate it, quietly. I compiled the original architecture, showed the differences, explained how the structural edits weakened integrity. I submitted a full report to Lieutenant Commander Rawlins. He read it, then locked eyes with me and said, "This reads like finger-pointing Avery. That's not going to help your standing. My standing." As if I was on trial. As if defending my work was a breach of decorum. I left that meeting with my hands shaking, not because I was afraid, but because I could feel something in me breaking. Not rage, something colder. Clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you realize merit isn't enough. Not here. Not now. Not yet. That was the week I almost left. I drafted a resignation letter. I even typed the subject line of the email. But I didn't hit send. Because something else stopped me. A voice. Not Rollins, not Blake, not even Admiral Greer. It was Chief Darnell years earlier back at the academy. I remembered him leaning over a table during a field sim and saying, "You don't walk away when it gets unfair, Cadet. That's when you double down. Because that's when they expect you to fold." I didn't fold, but something inside me shifted from hope to resolve. If they weren't going to open the door, I was going to break the lock. After that simulation failure, things didn't go back to normal. They just went quiet. Uncomfortably quiet. Like a storm that hadn't passed, just paused to circle back stronger. Nobody mentioned the misfire again. It was swept under some classified rug where things go to be forgotten. The higher-ups pretended it was just a systems hiccup and Blake. He got reassigned, not reprimanded, to a different division. More visibility, fewer risks. Meanwhile, I stayed behind, stuck in the ghost space. Too valuable to cut, too inconvenient to promote. The report I'd submitted, the one that detailed the architectural sabotage to my original system, was never acknowledged in writing. It never got logged. It was like it never existed. I kept a time-stamped copy saved to a personal encrypted drive just in case. Not out of revenge, out of instinct, because by now I understood what I was up against. I still remember sitting in that cold, sterile briefing room the next week. Same cheap coffee. Same humming overhead lights. I was surrounded by men who barely looked at me. When I raised a concern during a threat analysis meeting, one of the senior strategists glanced at my nameplate and said, "Thanks, Commander Avery, but we're focusing on frontline logistics right now, not back-end software." Back-end software. He said it like I'd offered to fix the printers. I sat back and said nothing. Not because I agreed, but because I'd learned the cost of speaking too soon, or worse, too loudly. That night I went home, stood in front of the bathroom mirror, and asked myself something I hadn't dared to ask before. What if this is as far as I go? Not because I wasn't good enough, but because I didn't play the game. I didn't brown nose. I didn't trade favors. I didn't charm my way into rooms or make jokes at the expense of others. I did the work. I led with data. I thought that would be enough. It wasn't. And that realization broke something in me that had stayed whole for far too long. A few days later, I found out through someone in admin that Blake had been invited to speak on a joint Navy congressional panel about cybersecurity readiness. Apparently, he was now the face of modern digital defense. The words made my jaw tighten. I had to read the memo twice just to believe it. I didn't scream, didn't cry. But I did something else. I booked a few days of leave and went home to Jacksonville. I hadn't been back in over a year. The house was smaller than I remembered. The paint on the garage was chipped, and the lock on the back fence still jammed like it used to. Mom hadn't changed much hair, grayer hands thinner, but still moving with purpose. We sat on the back porch the first night I got in. The air was warm, thick with southern summer humidity. I hadn't told her everything just enough. She listened, eyes narrowed, silent as always. Then she leaned back in her chair, looked out toward the stars, and said, "They don't see you yet because you never needed them to. That scares people." I swallowed hard. She reached over, took my hand, and added, "Rachel, you don't have to shout to be powerful, but don't let them teach you to disappear either." That stayed with me, because that's what I had been doing, disappearing, shrinking, dulling my edges to make room for lesser men with louder voices. Before I left Florida, I went to my dad's old workshop. The lights flickered when I turned them on, and dust coated every surface, but the smell of grease and steel was still there, still home. I opened one of the old drawers and found a notebook, the one we used to sketch out engine schematics when I was a kid. I flipped through it page by page, watching my younger handwriting grow steadier with each diagram. At the back of the notebook in my dad's handwriting was a single quote, "Don't wait for permission. Build what they can't ignore." I stared at that line for a long time, and then I made a decision. When I returned to DC, I didn't go back to waiting. I got to work, not on some approved assignment, not on another team project that would get stolen and watered down. I started building my own framework in my off hours in secret on personal clearance time, a new kind of system, one that couldn't be diluted or stripped of credit, one designed to do more than just detect attacks. It could predict, simulate, and pre-position countermeasures in real time. It was a mix of AI modeling, behavioral mapping, and fleet-level cyber defense that no one in our division had ever attempted. They said it couldn't be done. They hadn't seen what I'd built. At first, I didn't tell anyone. I just coded, tested, failed, rebuilt, quietly, relentlessly. And when it was finally ready, when the simulations returned with success rates above 96%, I wrote a paper. Not for publication, but for Admiral Greer. I attached the simulation logs, the system architecture, and a single-line message. "Sir, if you're looking for the future of naval defense, it's already here." I sent it late at night. Then I closed my laptop and went to sleep for the first time in weeks without grinding my teeth. I didn't expect an immediate response, but I got one the next morning. It was brief, just 4 words, "Report to my office." And just like that, the silence finally broke. I arrived outside Admiral Greer's office 15 minutes early, pacing the length of the hallway while trying to calm the buzz in my chest. I'd spent months building that system in shadows, in silence. This was it. The moment where my work might finally be seen, validated. The Admiral's aide finally opened the door and nodded. "He's ready for you, Commander." I stepped inside. Admiral Greer sat behind his desk, arms folded, expression unreadable. On the screen behind him was my simulation report, open, active. I took a breath, stood at attention. He didn't speak right away, just gestured toward the chair. "Sit." I obeyed. The room felt suddenly colder than I remembered it. Sterile. Formal. He stared at me, tapping a pen lightly on the edge of the desk. "You built this off the books. It wasn't a question." "Yes, sir." "You used simulation bandwidth without clearance." "Yes, sir. And your AI modeling ran off unapproved Navy databases." "With proper encryption, sir. No breaches, no leaks." He nodded slowly. "You know this could lead to disciplinary action." That hit me in the gut, not because I was surprised, but because I had hoped, maybe foolishly, that he would see past the breach of protocol to the why of it. "I wasn't trying to undermine anyone, sir, but I had a system that could protect lives. And I've watched too many good systems get stripped down until they're worthless." He didn't respond right away. Just swiveled the monitor toward me, pulled up one of the simulation results. "This score? 97.4%. Is that accurate?" "It's repeatable, sir. Across 5 different attack models, including the Horizon failure scenario." He leaned back in his chair, exhaled long and deep. "You should have brought this to me first. I didn't think it would survive the chain of command." That was the truth. Rawlins would have buried it. Blake would have plagiarized it. The system would have been diluted, tested to death, or stripped of its core functionality by people who didn't understand it. I needed it to exist first. intact. Greer looked at me, and for the first time in years, I couldn't read him. "You're not wrong," he said finally, "but you're not untouchable either." He stood, walked around the desk, and handed me a sealed folder. "I'm assigning you to an advisory unit in Norfolk, temporarily. You'll oversee a new round of threat simulations. Quietly. You're not to speak about this system outside of that team." "Sir Commander," he cut in, voice sharp now. "You either play by enough of the rules to survive, or the rules bury you. This is your shot. Take it." I stood, saluted. But my hands were trembling. The move to Norfolk wasn't a promotion. It was a reassignment, strategic maybe, but also a message. I'd stepped out of line, and now I was being put in a box, albeit a nicer one. The advisory unit was small 6 officers, most of them overworked and underinformed. My new supervisor, Lieutenant Commander Amelia Grant, was sharp, fair, but cautious. I respected her. She didn't play games. But even she warned me in our first meeting. "You've made some noise, Avery. Some people aren't thrilled you bypassed the usual process." "It wasn't about ego," I said quietly. "It never is. But it still paints a target." She let me work, though, gave me access to simulation rooms, let me run the system under tighter protocols. But I could feel the difference. I wasn't being groomed for command. I was being watched. Still, I kept my head down, focused on the tech. Until the meeting with Commander Rollins happened. He was visiting Norfolk for a systems audit, just a formality, or so they said. I hadn't seen him since the Horizon mess. I wasn't eager to. He walked into the briefing room like he owned it, glanced at me like I was still the girl who'd overreacted to being sidelined. "Commander Avery," he said with that tight-lipped smirk. "Still breaking rules, I see." "Still ignoring the consequences of yours, sir," I replied. That earned a few coughs from the junior staff. Grant raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Rollins flipped through the simulation logs, then turned to me. "This system, it's impressive, but still theoretical. It's operational, if given clearance. Clearance isn't your decision." He smiled, then smug and slow. "Let me guess. Still chasing validation from the big chairs Greer might have shielded you for now, but you're one misstep from being reassigned to desk duty for the rest of your career." Something in me snapped. If protecting lives and building a system that works makes me a problem, maybe the problem isn't me. He stood, hands on the table. "Watch your tone, Commander. Only if you watch your legacy." The room went still. Grant cleared her throat. "Gentlemen, that's enough." Rollins left not long after. I knew I'd just drawn a new line in the sand, one I couldn't step back from. That night, I walked down to the edge of the dock where the bay met the stars. I sat on a bench and stared at the black water, wondering how far was too far to push. I'd spent my whole career thinking if I just worked harder, built better, delivered faster, eventually they'd see me. But I was wrong. They didn't want to see me. Because seeing me meant admitting that their system, their comfort, their hierarchy was flawed. And that's when it really hit me. This wasn't just about credit anymore. It was about change. Systemic, stubborn, overdue change. And if I didn't fight for it now, I never would. Even if it meant being alone. Even if it meant losing the career I'd built. Because I'd rather burn out on truth than fade out in silence. Continue to Part 5. Low Point. Part 2. The breaking moment and the turning point. The days after that confrontation with Rollins felt like walking a tightrope blindfolded. I kept running simulations, refining the system, documenting everything to a T. But the weight of being under unofficial scrutiny was real. Every email I sent, every change I logged, I second-guessed it all. The room was watching, and not all of it was friendly. One morning, I came into the office to find my access to the system database suspended. No warning, no explanation. Just a red screen blinking authorization denied. I stared at it, heart thudding in my ears. My breath hitched, not in fear, but in that kind of stunned fury you feel when something you built is yanked out of your hands without ceremony. Lieutenant Commander Grant called me in 10 minutes later. She was calm, professional, but something in her eyes had shifted. "Admiral's orders," she said carefully. "Until the system undergoes full review and formal security clearance, we're freezing access. It's protocol." Protocol, I asked, barely containing myself. This protocol didn't exist when Blake was giving speeches on stolen architecture. She looked at me, tired and maybe a little sympathetic. Rachel, this isn't about your system. It's about optics, politics. There are people higher up who are uncomfortable with how this came to light. You challenged the ladder, and now they're pulling it up. I clenched my jaw. So, I'm being punished for building something that worked. No, she said gently. You're being punished for proving they were wrong. That night I couldn't sleep. I laid in bed staring at the ceiling fan. The same thoughts kept circling. I had done everything they said to do more. I had delivered value. I had been loyal, discreet professional. But it didn't matter, because I had threatened their hierarchy, their unspoken rigid belief in who gets to lead and who gets to serve, and maybe, just maybe, because I wasn't one of them, not the old guard, not a legacy, not a man, not loud, just me. I got up at 3 a.m. and opened my encrypted drive. Every line of code, every report, every protocol I had built, all there untouched. Mine. I wasn't ready to quit. But I was beginning to understand that waiting for fairness in a rigged game was a waste of time. So I started planning. 2 weeks later, I received an official notice I was being rotated out. My temporary assignment in Norfolk had been marked as complete. I was being reassigned to an administrative role back in DC logistics and data compliance. It was a demotion in everything but title. I sat there in Grant's office as she delivered the news, her lips tight. She hated it. I could tell. I'm sorry, Rachel. I fought it, but the order came from FleetCom directly. I didn't ask who pulled the trigger. I already knew. Back in DC, my new office had no windows, no team, just a desk and a terminal and a daily checklist of reports no one would ever read. I wasn't even allowed access to the simulation environment anymore. It was exile. Not loud, not formal, but absolute. Worse than that, people started avoiding me. Old colleagues who used to nod in the hallway now looked down when they passed. A few whispered. One of them, a lieutenant I'd trained personally, saw me in the commissary and turned around before I could wave. That was the day I cracked. I went home, closed the blinds, sat on the floor and let the tears come. Not from weakness, but from sheer, unbearable grief. Grief for everything I had sacrificed, the nights, the silence, the loyalty, and grief for the girl who once believed that being excellent was enough. I stayed in that darkness for 3 days. Didn't check email, didn't go in. I thought about calling my mom, but I didn't want to hear the hurt in her voice. I didn't want to admit how far I'd fallen. The Navy hadn't just sidelined me. They had tried to erase me, and for a while, it worked. But on the 4th morning, something changed. I woke to find a message from an encrypted account. A single line of text. They may have silenced you, but we've seen what you built. Attached was a signature Rear Admiral Helena Ford, Cyber Defense Command, U.S. Navy Pacific Fleet. I blinked, read it again. Then I clicked the attachment. It was a request, discreet but formal, to review a private proposal for a new joint task force on fleet-wide preemptive cyber deterrence. She referenced my simulations, my flagged reports, my original Horizon design. The tone was clear. She knew what happened, and she didn't agree. My heart thudded like thunder in my chest. Someone had seen me. Not just the work. Me. I packed a bag and flew to San Diego the next day. Rear Admiral Ford met me in a private conference room overlooking the harbor. She was tall, composed, and spoke like someone who had learned to command with precision. You were punished for being right too soon, she said bluntly. I was punished for being loud about it. You weren't loud, she corrected. You were accurate. That scares people more. Then she leaned in. We want to build something they can't ignore. And I don't just want your system, I want you to lead the architecture. That moment didn't erase the pain, but it rewrote the story. Not as a downfall, but as a turning point. Because finally, I saw the path forward. Not through silence, but through strategic defiance. I wasn't broken. I had only just begun. Rear Admiral Helena Ford didn't waste time with niceties. Within 20 minutes of our meeting, she slid a classified operations packet across the table. It bore the seal of the U.S. Pacific Fleet's cyber defense initiative stamped in red eyes only. We're building a new joint response cyber unit, she said, one that operates parallel to conventional commands but isn't tangled in their politics. We're calling it Sentinel Corps. I want you as lead architect, but I need an answer fast. It felt like I'd stepped into an alternate timeline. Me, Rachel Avery, 28, blacklisted by half the East Coast command chain, being asked to spearhead a project at the bleeding edge of naval cyber warfare. I flipped through the pages. The scope was massive. Fleet-wide Defense AI-Assisted Threat Prediction Global Simulation Authority. It was exactly the kind of system I'd built in secret. Only this time I'd be building it in the light. Still, I hesitated. "You're sure this won't get buried?" I asked. Ford gave me a look, not impatient but sharp. "Commander, the only reason I found your report is because someone tried very hard to erase it. That's the kind of thing that gets my attention. I've spent 25 years watching brilliant minds like yours get filtered out by ladder climbers. I'm not here to babysit egos. I'm here to build a firewall the size of the Pacific, and I want you to be the damn blueprint." My throat tightened. It was the first time in years someone had seen my talent and didn't immediately try to claim or contain it. "I'm in," I said. "One condition." She raised an eyebrow. "Go on. I get to pick my team. No dead weight, no backstabbers, no Blake Connors." She smirked. "You'd be surprised how many lists like that I keep." That night in my San Diego hotel room, I opened my old whiteboard notes. The code structure I'd written months ago looked different now, not in form, but in what it represented. Back then, it was a desperate act, a rebellion in silence. Now, it was the foundation of a future no one could erase. I started reaching out, first to the quiet geniuses I knew from my Norfolk days techs and coders who never sought recognition but delivered brilliance anyway. Then, to analysts I'd met during Horizon, the ones who voiced quiet doubts in private, never loud enough to be penalized. Finally, I messaged Lieutenant Aria Delgado, someone I hadn't worked with closely, but remembered for one reason: she'd stood up for me in a meeting when everyone else looked away. Just one sentence. One act of courage. That's who I needed now. People with skill and spine. Building Sentinel Corps was like watching oxygen rush into a room after a fire. No more political roadblocks. No chain of command stifling creativity. Just raw momentum. The lab they gave us in San Diego was cavernous rows of terminals, simulation pods, satellite uplinks. I stood in the middle of that room the first day and felt something stir in me that I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not blind faith. Not naive optimism. Real grounded hope. We got to work fast. The system, which I named Aura Adaptive Unified Response Algorithm, was modeled on my original Horizon structure, but faster, smarter. It learned from simulations in real time and deployed theoretical defenses that could be translated directly into fleet code. By month 2, we had early tests showing 99.1% integrity in active breach scenarios. By month 4, we ran a live shadow simulation against a carrier group in the South China Sea. Aura isolated a hypothetical breach within 26 seconds and restored comms with 0 data loss. Unprecedented. Still, I kept everything documented. Thoroughly. Every line of code. Every deployment. Every name. Because I knew how the system could still fail me, not Aura, but the system. The politics. The men who didn't forget a woman who challenged them. But something had changed now. I wasn't alone. This time I had a team that stood beside me, not behind me. Delgado especially became my right hand. She didn't just understand the architecture, she added to it, sharpened it. She never asked for credit. She never had to. She earned it, and I made sure she got it. 6 months in, I received word that Admiral Greer had retired. No fanfare, no scandal. Just gone. I didn't dance. I didn't gloat, but I did sit on the beach that evening watching the waves roll in and whispered, "You tried to erase me." I became the firewall instead. Then came the real test, a classified breach attempt on a communication satellite, not a simulation. Real. Pacific Command was tight-lipped, but we knew enough. A hostile actor had embedded dormant code in a non-military payload uplink. If it had activated, it could have triggered false deployment commands across 2 naval fleets. Aura caught it, intercepted, quarantined, neutralized. In real time. Not a single command post even knew how close we came to disaster. When the dust settled, Rear Admiral Ford called me to her office. She raised her hand to salute and said, "They called you reckless. I call you essential." I didn't salute back right away. I just smiled, not from pride, but from peace. Peace that came not from vengeance, but from being undeniable. A few weeks after Sentinel Core officially went live and Aura intercepted its first real-world breach, I received a formal invitation. A recognition ceremony at the Pentagon. The note was brief, but clear my work had played a critical role in national cyber defense. I was to be honored alongside Rear Admiral Ford and select members of our team. I should have felt proud. Instead, my stomach twisted, because I knew who else would be there. Not just the brass and the press, but the ghosts, the ones who doubted me, silenced me, belittled me. The same people who once called me expendable and quietly reassigned me to a windowless room while someone else tried to steal the system I built. Now they'd have to sit and clap while I walked the stage. Or look away. Either would be satisfying. The morning of the ceremony, I wore my service dress blues pressed polished and formal. My ribbons were few compared to the chestfuls some officers wore, but every single one had been earned in silence. No shortcuts, no favors. As I stepped into the Pentagon's Central Conference Hall, the atmosphere was heavy with hierarchy: generals, admirals, reporters, command officers. I scanned the room, and there they were. Rollins seated near the front in a silver-trimmed uniform, eyes fixed on his tablet as if refusing to look at me. Greer was a few rows behind him, more subdued. There was no Blake, no surprise. He'd either transferred out or decided he couldn't handle seeing me rise. Good. Let him hide. I kept my posture straight as I walked down the aisle. No smile, no nerves, just steel. The ceremony began. Rear Admiral Ford gave a speech that I'll never forget, not because it was flowery or emotional, but because it was honest. Sometimes the most innovative minds don't come from the most obvious places. Sometimes the system rejects them before it recognizes their value. But today we correct that. And then she said my name. Commander Rachel Avery, your work saved lives. Your vision gave us a firewall that thinks adapts and protects not just data, but the people behind it. You led a quiet revolution. And today, we say your name out loud. I stepped onto the stage. The room stood. Applause swelled, genuine or not, it echoed all the same. But that wasn't the moment. No. The moment came when a tall man in 4-star uniform stepped forward, the Chief of Naval Operations himself, the most senior officer in the entire U.S. Navy. He walked up to me and saluted. "Commander Avery," he said in a clear, unwavering voice, "you trained our best, and you protected our fleet. It's an honor to return the gesture." A 4-star admiral saluting me. I stood frozen for a breath, then returned the salute. I wasn't blinking back tears. I was memorizing that moment, not for pride, but for proof. Proof that the girl they once tried to erase had become someone they couldn't deny. After the ceremony, I mingled briefly. Officers who'd once ignored me now nodded politely. Some offered congratulations. Others just avoided eye contact. That was fine. I wasn't here for their validation. But one face stood out. Rollins. He approached, hands behind his back. His expression wasn't smug anymore. It was measured, maybe even remorseful. "Commander," he said, voice low, "I underestimated you." "We all did." I held his gaze. "You didn't underestimate me," I replied. "You saw me clearly. You just didn't like what you saw." He gave a slow nod. "Fair enough." And then he left. No apology, but no defense either. I could live with that. Later, outside the building, a young lieutenant approached me, couldn't have been more than 24. Nervous, wide-eyed. "Ma'am, she said your story." It's the reason I stayed. I almost dropped from my cyber track. Thought I didn't belong. But then I read about Aura. About you. I smiled gently. You don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to build something so good they can't ignore it." She nodded like it was a lifeline. And maybe for her, it was. As I walked to the car, the sun just starting to dip over the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not triumph, not revenge, not even justice. Just peace. Because I had faced them, all of them. The whispers, the power plays, the silences meant to shrink me. And I had survived. No, I had succeeded. Not because I changed to fit them, but because I held the line even when it cost me everything. Now I wasn't afraid to speak, but I didn't need to speak loudly either. Because I'd already said everything I needed to through the system I built, the team I led, and the firewall that now protected thousands of lives. The Navy had tried to forget me. Instead, I became a name they'd never forget. After the ceremony, life didn't magically become simple. The military doesn't change overnight, especially not for women like me. People still talked, some still questioned. Others tried to reframe my story in a way that made them more comfortable. But here's the difference: I didn't care anymore. I had walked through the fire, not untouched, but unbroken. And what rose from the ashes wasn't just a woman with a system. It was a woman with conviction, clarity, and command. Back at the Sentinel Corps facility, I returned to the hum of real work. No more politics, no more rehearsed salutes. Just terminals glowing with code strategy meetings that actually mattered, and a team that showed up every single day ready to build. Delgado was now my second in command and fully deserved it. She'd grown into her leadership with quiet precision, mirroring what I once was and improving upon it. Watching her handle conflict with calm logic or pitch system upgrades with confidence reminded me of who I used to be. Before the bruises. Before the silence. She made me believe that change could last beyond me. One afternoon, after wrapping up a scenario debrief with our AI response unit, I found a message on my desk. Handwritten. Unofficial. No sender listed, but the handwriting was familiar. Never let them convince you that quiet equals weak. Some of us were listening the whole time. You just spoke a different frequency. No signature, but I knew who it was from. Rear Admiral Ford had a way of saying everything in one sentence. The Navy began requesting our input on broader defense applications. Things I never thought I'd touch: civilian infrastructure protection, satellite integrity chains, and even international cooperative drills. And through it all, ARA remained the core, a system born in exile, now central to strategy. The irony never escaped me. They had tried to erase me, but I had become the very thing they needed to survive. I was no longer Rachel Avery, the expendable software engineer. I was Commander Rachel Avery, lead architect of the Navy's most advanced cyber defense system mentor, to rising officers in proof that persistence could outrun prejudice. But the real victory came quietly. It wasn't in a headline. It came one Friday evening as I stood on the balcony outside my office watching the sun disappear behind the Pacific. Delgado joined me, 2 mugs of black coffee in hand. "You ever think about how far we've come?" she asked. I nodded. All the time. What kept you going back then? When they tried to cut you out, I looked down at the steam rising from the mug. Thought about it. Anger, I said honestly. And then clarity. I realized they weren't just trying to stop me, they were trying to scare others like me from ever trying. She was quiet a moment. Then, well, you scared them right back. We both laughed, not the polite kind, the kind that comes after war. Years later, when I gave my final briefing before transferring to a strategic advisory role at FleetCom, I opened with this: they said I wasn't loud enough, I wasn't bold enough, that I lacked command presence. But it turns out you don't have to be the loudest voice in the room, you just have to build something too powerful to ignore. The room full of cadets, officers, and engineers was still. Then someone stood up and saluted, then another, and another, until the whole room was on its feet. That's when I knew. I hadn't just proven a point. I'd changed the story. And so, if you're hearing this now, if you've ever been overlooked, talked over, or told to stay in your lane, let me leave you with this. Your silence isn't weakness. Your patience isn't surrender. Your resilience is not invisible. You are not invisible. Some of us are just wired differently. We don't shout. We build, we wait, we sharpen, and when the time comes, we deliver something the world can't deny. My name is Rachel Avery. I'm 29 years old. I was once considered expendable, but now I am the firewall.